6 small bodies lay motionless under the blazing Arizona sun, while buzzards circled overhead like messengers from the death zone. The oldest girl, maybe 14, clutched a rusted canteen that hadn't held water in 2 days. Her cracked lips moved in silent prayer while the youngest, a boy no older than 4, had stopped crying hours ago, a silence more terrifying than any scream. Minerva Blackwood spotted the wreckage from half a mile away. The overturned wagon sat like a broken bone against the endless desert, its canvas top shredded by wind and time. She'd been tracking wild horses when the glint of metal caught her eye, but now her weathered hands gripped the reins tighter. In 15 years of living alone on the edge of nowhere, she'd learned that other people's problems had a way of becoming your own grave. But something about the scene pulled at her chest. Maybe it was how still everything looked, or maybe it was the way the buzzards kept landing and taking off, as if even they weren't sure their meal was ready. She thought about turning her horse around and riding back to the isolation of her ranch, where the only voices she heard were her own and the wind rattling the broken shutters. After losing her husband, Samuel, and their boy, Jacob, to an Apache raid 5 years back, she had sworn off caring about anything with a heartbeat. Yet, here she was, urging her horse forward through the scorching heat. The closer she got, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just any group of travelers. This was a family wagon, the kind that carried everything someone owned in the world. Clothes were scattered like tumbleweeds. A child's wooden toy lay half buried in sand. And worst of all, there were the shapes that hadn't moved since she first spotted them. The oldest girl's eyes snapped open as Minerva's shadow fell across her face. Those eyes held a mixture of hope and terror that made Minerva's stomach twist. The girl tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper that sounded like, "Please." Behind her, 5 other children lay, in various states of consciousness, their small bodies already showing the brutal signs of desert exposure. Minerva climbed down from her horse, her boots hitting the sand with a soft thud. She'd seen death before, plenty of it, but something about these children made her chest feel like it was being crushed in a vice. The girl who'd opened her eyes was clearly the oldest, with sun-bleached hair and a face that had aged years in what couldn't have been more than days. She wore a torn blue dress that might have been pretty once, and her arm was wrapped protectively around a smaller child who couldn't have been more than 6. Water? That's what they needed first, but Minerva only had enough in her canteen for maybe 2 of them. In this heat, sharing it might save them all or kill them all. Her hand hovered over the canteen at her hip while her mind raced through possibilities. Her ranch was 8 miles east, but these children couldn't make that journey in their condition. Leaving them here to fetch help meant risking that she'd return to find only corpses. But as she looked at their faces, some peaceful in unconsciousness, others twisted with pain, she realized the choice had already been made, not by her mind, but by something deeper that she thought died with her own family. She uncapped her canteen and knelt beside the oldest girl. Tilting the container toward those parched lips, the girl drank desperately, water running down her chin as her body remembered what it felt like to be alive. When she'd had enough, she grabbed Minerva's wrist with surprising strength and pointed to the smaller children. No words were needed. Minerva understood. Save them first. But as Minerva moved to the next child, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Hoofbeats in the distance, coming fast from the north. In this part of the territory, riders moving with that kind of urgency usually meant one of 2 things: outlaws running from the law, or something worse, hunting for easy prey. The riders emerged from the heat, shimmer like demons from hell itself. 3 men on horseback, their faces hidden behind bandanas and their guns already drawn. Minerva's hand instinctively moved to the rifle on her horse, but she was caught in the worst possible position, kneeling beside the children, completely exposed with nowhere to run. The lead rider pulled up 30 feet away, close enough for Minerva to see the cruel intelligence in his eyes above the dirty cloth covering his mouth. His horse snorted and stamped, sensing the tension that crackled between them like lightning before a storm. The other to spread out to flank her, a move that spoke of experience. Minerva slowly stood, keeping her hands visible, but ready. She'd survived this long and hostile territory by reading men like weather patterns. and everything about these three screamed danger. The way they sat their horses, the casual confidence of their gun hands, the fact that they'd approached a lone woman in the desert without hesitation, none of it pointed to anything good. The leader spoke first, his voice as rough as sandpaper. Well, what do we have here? A regular angel of mercy, it looks like. His eyes moved from Minerva to the children scattered around the wagon wreckage, and his tone shifted to something that made her skin crawl. Mighty convenient, finding all these little ones out here with nobody to look after them. The oldest girl, the one who grabbed Minerva's wrist, struggled to sit up. Her eyes darted between the armed men and Minerva, intelligence burning bright despite her condition. She understood the danger and inched closer to the smaller children, as if her 14-year-old body could somehow shield them from what was coming. Minerva kept her voice steady, just passing through, and saw the wagon. These children need water and medical attention. She gestured toward her horse. I've got supplies that might help. The second rider, a thin man with nervous eyes, laughed. Supplies, she says. Jack, you think she's got the kind of supplies we're looking for? His gaze lingered on the children in a way that made Minerva's blood boil, but she forced herself to stay calm. Anger would get them all killed. Jack, apparently the leader, urged his horse closer. Funny thing about this territory, lady, dangerous for folks traveling alone, especially with valuable cargo. His meaning was as clear as the desert air. The third man, silent until now, finally spoke. His voice carried a different quality, educated, which somehow made him more frightening. The question is, what's a woman like you doing out here alone? This isn't exactly a place for Sunday rides. His horse stepped sideways, positioning him to cut off any escape route to the east. Minerva realized with growing dread that these men weren't random desperados. They moved with too much coordination. Either they'd been watching her ranch, or they knew exactly who she was. The oldest girl made a small sound, half cough, half plea. Please, she managed, the word barely audible, but carrying the weight of 6 lives hanging in the balance. Jack's attention shifted to her, his eyes narrowing with the focus of a predator. But as the standoff stretched tighter than a bowstring, Minerva heard something else cutting through the desert silence, another set of hoof beats, coming fast from a different direction. The approaching rider wore the star of a territorial marshal. But instead of relief, Minerva felt her blood turn to ice water. Marshal Cade Brennan had a reputation that stretched from Tucson to Santa Fe, not for justice, but for the kind of law enforcement that came with a price tag. His presence here wasn't a coincidence. Jack and his men immediately shifted their positions, but didn't holster their weapons. The fact that they weren't running told Minerva everything she needed to know about who was really in charge. Brennan pulled up his sweating horse and surveyed the scene with the cold calculation of a man counting money. Gentlemen, he said, tipping his hat in mock courtesy, and the lovely Mrs. Blackwood. Fancy meeting you out here in such interesting circumstances. The way he said her name made Minerva's skin crawl. Brennan knew exactly who she was, which meant this was all a setup. Her isolated ranch, her reputation for avoiding people, her tragic past had all made perfect sense now. These children weren't just victims of circumstance. They were bait. You know, Mrs. Blackwood, Brennan continued, dismounting with theatrical slowness, his spurs jingling. There's been some concern about your well-being, living out there all alone. No family, no protection. Some folks think it might be time for you to consider a change of scenery. The pieces clicked into place. Her ranch sat on prime water rights, the kind that big cattle operations would kill for. With her dead, the land would go to territorial auction, and who better to arrange such a convenient accident than a corrupt marshal and his hired guns? Especially, Brennan continued, walking closer to the children. When there are innocent lives at stake, these poor orphans need proper care, don't you think? A woman alone in the wilderness can't possibly provide the kind of protection they require. The implication hit Minerva like a sledgehammer. These weren't just land grabbers. They were traffickers. The children weren't witnesses to be eliminated. They were merchandise to be sold. As Brennan reached down toward the oldest girl, his intentions crystal clear. Something inside Minerva snapped with the finality of a breaking bone. Her hand moved faster than desert lightning. Her Colt pointed for 5 cleared leather and spoke once, the gunshot echoing off distant canyon walls like thunder. Brandon's hat flew backward as the bullet parted his hair by less than an inch, close enough that he could feel the heat of its passage. The corrupt marshal froze, his hand still reaching toward the girl. "Touch one of these children," Minerva said, her voice carrying the quiet certainty of a loaded gun, "and I'll paint this desert with your brains." The barrel of her Colt never wavered, trained dead center on Brennan's forehead. Around them, the other men shifted nervously, but none were foolish enough to draw on a woman who just demonstrated such skill. Jack's educated companion spoke carefully, his cultured voice tight with controlled fear. "Mrs. Blackwood, you're making a serious mistake. Marshal Brennan represents territorial law. Threatening an officer is a hanging offense." Minerva's laugh held no humor. "Law? The only law I see here is for men planning to murder a woman and sell children like cattle." Her finger tightened fractionally on the trigger, and Brennan's face went pale. "Question is, which one of you wants to die first, testing my resolve?" The youngest child, the 4-year-old boy who'd stopped crying, suddenly made a small sound and went completely limp. The oldest girl's face crumpled as she realized what was happening. Time was running out, but as Minerva felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her, she heard a sound that changed everything, the distinctive whistle of an Apache war cry, coming from the rocks above them. The war cry cut through the desert air like a blade, instantly transforming enemies into reluctant allies. 5 warriors emerged from behind rock formations where they'd been watching, their faces painted for war and their weapons ready. In the brutal mathematics of frontier survival, Apache raiders trump corrupt lawmen every time. Brandon's face went from pale to ashen gray. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before remembering Minerva's Colt was still trained on his skull. The lead Apache warrior, a man with scars across his chest that spoke of many battles, raised his rifle and shouted something in his native language. His companions spread out along the ridge, creating a killing field with no escape. These were experienced fighters. Brennan tried to project authority, his voice shaking. "I'm a territorial marshal. Attacking me is an act of war against the United States government." The Apache warrior's response was a laugh that held no warmth, followed by words in English that were perfectly clear. "Your government means nothing in our land. 10-star man." Minerva realized with crystal clarity that her options were gone. Running meant abandoning the children. Fighting meant a gun battle with kids caught in the crossfire. Surrendering meant trusting warriors who had every reason to hate white settlers. But as she watched the oldest girl desperately trying to keep her little brother alive, something clicked in her memory. The lead warrior's scars, the way he held his rifle she'd seen him before, not in battle, but in a moment of unexpected mercy that had saved her life. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw the exact moment recognition dawned. The Apache warrior's name was Nownish. 5 years ago, he'd been the one to pull her from the burning wreckage of her home, while his war party finished destroying everything she loved. Instead of killing her, he'd whispered something she'd never understood, touched the silver locket around her neck that held her son's picture, and simply walked away. Now, he stood on the rocky ridge, his weathered face showing the same strange mix of recognition and calculation. He called out in accented English, his voice carrying undeniable authority. "Woman with dead son's memory." He gestured toward the locket. "You should not be here with 10-star men who steal children." Brennan tried to interject. "These children are under territorial protection," but Nowlish's contemptuous snort cut him off. The oldest girl suddenly spoke, her voice weak but determined. "My name is Emma. These are my brothers and sisters. Our parents died 3 days ago when our wagon broke down." She gestured toward the wreckage. "This lady, she's the first person who tried to help us." Something in Emma's tone, the fierce protectiveness, seemed to resonate with Nownish. Apache culture valued courage, and this 14-year-old girl was showing more of it than the forearmed men. Jack's educated companion made a fatal mistake by solely reaching for his gun. Nowlish's rifle swung toward him with fluid precision, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Move that hand 1 more inch, book reader, and vultures will feast on your eyes tonight." The man's hand froze. Minerva made a decision that went against every survival instinct. She slowly holstered her Colt and raised both hands, addressing Nowlish directly. "These children will die without help. I have medical supplies at my ranch 8 miles east. Let me take them there." Nowlish studied. Her face. "White woman who lost everything speaks truth, but 10-star men follow you. Bring soldiers, bring more death to our land." Just then, the youngest boy, the one who'd gone limp, convulsed and went completely still. Emma's scream of anguish cut through every other sound draw, primal and utterly heartbreaking. The silence that followed was broken by Nowlish's voice, now carrying a new tone of decision. "One child is already walking the spirit trail. Others will follow unless—" He paused, looking directly at Brennan and his men. "Unless those who would harm children are prevented from following." Minerva understood the implicit offer, and its brutal logic made her stomach turn. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the air before Nowlish could give the signal. "These men live, but they leave out forever." Nowlish tilted his head, puzzled. "White woman speaks strangely. These men would have sold young ones like horses. They plan your death. Why do they deserve breath?" Emma looked up from her dead brother's body, her face streaked with tears and dust. "Because she's not like them," she whispered. "She's not like them at all." Minerva kept her eyes on Nowlish. "Killing them makes us no better than they are. Send them away broken and empty-handed. That's punishment enough for cowards." The second youngest child, a girl of maybe 6, started whimpering, slipping away just as her brother had. Time was bleeding away. Nowlish made his decision. He barked orders in Apache, and his warriors reluctantly lowered their rifles. Then he turned to Brennan and his men. 10-star man and dog followers, you have a choice. Ride north toward Mexico and never return, or stay here and feed ravens. Choose now, while a woman with mercy still protects your worthless lives." Brennan's hands shook as he gathered his reins. He and his men needed no further encouragement, spurring their horses northward so fast that dust clouds marked their retreat. Long after they disappeared, but as the hoofbeats faded, Emma's voice rose in panic. "She's not breathing. Sarah's not breathing." The 6-year-old had gone completely limp in her sister's arms. Mercy had cost them precious seconds. Nowlish was already moving down from the ridge. He reached Sarah before Minerva could move, his scarred hand surprisingly gentle as he pressed his ear to her chest. "Heart still beats," he said with grim determination, "but barely. She needs water, shade, and medicine we do not carry." Without hesitation, he lifted Sarah into his arms and called out in Apache. 2 of his warriors began constructing a makeshift stretcher from their spears and a blanket. "My ranch has everything we need," Minerva said, her mind racing. "But it's 8 miles through desert." Nowlish studied the horizon. "Apache horses are strong. Warriors will carry children. You lead us to the healing place." He looked directly into Minerva's eyes, and she saw something that transcended the hatred between their peoples. Children's lives matter, more than old wars. The necks are blurred together in controlled chaos. Nowlish's warriors worked with startling gentleness, lifting each child onto a horse. Minerva led the strange procession across the deadly terrain, Apache warriors behind her carrying dying children with the care of protective fathers. 5 years ago, Apache raiders had destroyed her family. Today, Apache warriors were helping her save one. By the time they reached her ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red. Nowlish's warriors immediately began turning her front room into a makeshift medical station. Sarah was the worst, burning with fever, but as Minerva worked with herbs and clean water, the little girl's eyes fluttered open. She focused on Emma's face and whispered a single word, "Sister." It took 3 more hours, but gradually each child stabilized. Hope replaced the desperate fear. Emma was the last to allow herself rest, finally collapsing into sleep. As Minerva tucked a blanket around her, she felt the fierce, protective love of a mother watching over her children. Now Nish approached quietly, his warriors preparing to leave. Woman with dead son's memory, he said softly, "You have new children now. Guard them well." He paused at the door, looking back one last time. Old debts are finished. New friendship begins here. As the Apache warriors disappeared into the night, Minerva stood watching over 6 sleeping children who had become her responsibility, her family, her chance at redemption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the gentle breathing of children who would live to see another sunrise, she heard something that had been missing from her life for far too long. She heard hope.